Thanks for tuning into this episode of our Essential Vectors series. In this episode, we will talk about the unintentional stall, which results in several fatal airplane crashes each year. What did the Wright brothers, Glenn Curtiss, Charles Lindbergh, Donald Douglas, Chuck Yeager, and Neil Armstrong all have in common? They all knew about the aerodynamic stall. Wolfgang Langewieschi's Timeless Stick and Rudder, with an original copyright date of 1944, discusses the aerodynamic stall and how it is caused by exceeding the critical angle of attack right on page 1, chapter 1. In fact, in page 2, it includes the quote, "If you only had 2 hours to explain the airplane to a student pilot, this is what you would have to explain." But pilots, their passengers, and sometimes unlucky individuals who happen to be beneath their flight paths die as the result of the inadvertent aerodynamic stall. There's been a commercial running on TV for a company that makes stairlifts. It begins by saying, quote, "Falls are the #1 cause of injury to senior citizens. We have the solution. Just don't fall." End quote. Since our subject here is to avoid the inadvertent stall, we can say that inadvertent stalls are a leading cause of fatal airplane crashes, and we have the solution. Just don't stall. We're just going to review the basics of the aerodynamic stall here, but we're going to spend more time on how we can avoid the unintentional stall. For all you need to know about the aerodynamic stall, refer to Chapter 5 in both the FAA's Airplane Flying Handbook and the FAA's Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. Both are available for free download from the FAA website. For our quick review, we know that a stall is caused by exceeding the wing's critical angle of attack. But what is angle of attack? It's simply the angle between the relative wind and the chord line of the wing. This graphic shows us some examples of angle of attack. In most GA airplanes, the critical angle of attack is found around the 16 or 17 degree point. It's simply when the air can no longer flow smoothly over the wing. Lift is no longer produced, and the wing is said to be stalled. Most manufacturers build the wing such that rather than have the entire wing stall at once, the stall begins near the wing root and progresses toward the tip. So nowhere in that description did it mention anything about airspeed. Why is it then that, since our airspeed indicators are color-coded to indicate stalling speed with and without flaps? The stalling speed applies only to the standard straight-ahead power-off stall. That means that the load factor is 1, meaning the G-load is also 1. If we make a turn, the stall speed will increase accordingly to how steeply we bank. To put some math into it, the stall speed increases with the square root of the load factor. If the bank angle gets to 60 degrees, let's say, the load factor is 2, so the square root of 2 is 1.4. The stall speed increases by about 40%. If our power-off stall speed was published as 60 knots, it would now become 84 knots in the 60-degree bank. I used to demonstrate this concept to my students. The old Piper PA-28-140 was perfect for this. I would fly the airplane and demonstrate a straight-ahead power-off stall. The student had already practiced stalls, so they were familiar with them, and I would instruct the student to concentrate on the airspeed indicator and put their finger on the needle exactly where it was when they felt the stall occur. I would recover from that and ask the student to tell me what the airspeed had been at the moment of the stall. I would repeat what they said to cement it in memory, then set up for an accelerated stall. I would give the student the same instruction to put the finger on the airspeed indicator exactly where it was when they felt the airplane stall. I would slow to maneuvering speed, roll into a 45-degree left bank, and smoothly pull back on the yoke until the airplane stalled. This is why the old Cherokee was perfect. When the stall occurred, the right wing would stall first, and the airplane would rapidly roll to the right. By releasing the back pressure on the yoke just before the airplane rolled level, the airplane would no longer be stalled, and we would have recovered with the wings precisely level. But I would ask the student to tell me the airspeed at which the airplane stalled when in the 45-degree bank. The stall speed would be considerably higher than it had been in the normal power-off stall. Therefore, concept demonstrated. How might this apply to the real world? One way that pilots sometimes find themselves in an inadvertent stall is during a steep turn. Remember the basic ground reference maneuvers, turn about a point? Remember how we had to steepen the turn when the wind was at our tail? If we're looking at something on the ground, as we come around with the wind at our tail, ground speed increases, and we increase the bank angle to keep the object in sight. What if the pilot is trying to show something to somebody on the ground, or has a photographer in the right seat, and the wind is strong and the pilot's correction is a bit late? Here's a scenario that has happened many times, unfortunately ending in a crash. A pilot wants to show a passenger something on the ground. The pilot attempts to keep the object in view at the same distance, but forgets to steepen the bank as the airplane acquires the tailwind. As the object begins to drift to the rear, the pilot begins to tighten the turn. By increasing the bank angle in an attempt to keep the object in view, they keep steepening the bank. Now, to maintain altitude in the steep turn, the pilot must apply increasing back pressure on the yoke. The stall speed increases to exceed the airspeed. The critical angle of attack is exceeded, and the airplane stalls, and a crash ensues. The natural instinct is to steepen that turn. As the bank angle increases and so does the load factor, the stall speed can increase to exceed the present airspeed, and the airplane stalls in the steep turn. The airplane would likely be at a low altitude to observe something on the ground, so recovery may not be possible at that point. Unfortunately, a recent crash illustrates this. This one happened in June 2023 in Virginia. This photo is the actual accident airplane taken from FlightAware.com. It's a Vans RV-6. A father and his adult son had spent the night with some friends and were departing for home around 10:15 a.m. local time. After departing, they made 2 circles around the house. A witness and a friend of the pilot and passenger stated he watched the airplane as it made 2 circles around his house. On the second circle, he noticed the airplane was in a very steep bank angle and making a tight circle about 100 feet above the ground. He then noticed the nose of the airplane drop down and the airplane impact the ground in a near vertical attitude. He stated that the engine was running well the entire time. The NTSB accident report includes the following, quote, "It's likely that while performing the low altitude circling maneuver, the pilot maintained insufficient airspeed and banked too steeply, which resulted in an exceedance of the airplane's critical angle of attack and a subsequent aerodynamic stall." End quote. The 28-year-old son was the pilot and airplane owner. He had a valid FAA Class II medical and current flight review. His total flight time is listed as 355 hours. The 28-year-old son was the pilot and airplane owner. He had a valid FAA Class II medical certificate and a current flight review. His total flight time is listed as 355 hours. No wind speed was provided in the accident report, so we do not know if an attempt to compensate for wind was involved. Let's just leave it that steep banks at low altitudes are a very, very bad idea. Another way pilots sometimes enter a stall inadvertently is during a go-around from an aborted landing. Once the pilot decides to abort the landing, the go-around is a multi-step process, greatly increasing the task load. The more complex the airplane, the more steps are involved and the greater the task load. Doing it right is critical, and making an error is sometimes fatal. The pilot must pitch up to maintain a climb attitude, increase power, raise landing gear, raise flaps, adjust trim, look for traffic, check airspeed for best angle of climb, notify the tower or other traffic, and of course more. Every year we have crashes that happen during a go-around. Many of these result from the pilot inadvertently stalling the airplane. I suspect that often the pilot has not practiced go-arounds or reviewed the go-around procedure for the specific airplane in a while. The correct order may not be followed when performing the necessary steps, or the task load surpasses the pilot's capabilities, and the airspeed is not monitored. Or the pilot is having difficulty avoiding rising terrain off the departure end of the runway and attempts to turn at a low airspeed. Here's what I do personally. I study the terrain surrounding any destination airport for terrain or obstacles near the runways. I know the go-around procedure recommended for the specific airplane I am flying, and I recite the procedure aloud when entering the pattern or when on the downwind leg. Here's an example of a recent crash that happened during a go-around attempt. This one, sadly, was a Young Eagles flight. The 76-year-old pilot was killed, and his 2 passengers, an 8-year-old child and the child's 40-year-old father, were seriously injured. The NTSB report includes the following related to the accident flight. Quote, "Following the local flight, the pilot was approaching the airport for landing. Witnesses noted that the airplane was low and slow on the approach and almost touched down short of the runway. Before landing, the pilot appeared to initiate a go-around. The engine power increased, the airplane's nose pitched up sharply, the left wing dropped, the engine power decreased, and the airplane impacted the ground inverted in a nose-low angle in front of a row of hangars adjacent to the runway. End quote. The NTSB report continues, quote, video recorded by the front seat passenger captured the accident flight and impact sequence. About 8 seconds before the impact, the video showed the flap selector switch in the up position. About 5 seconds before the impact, the video and audio captured an increase in engine RPM, followed by a left roll, an immediate decrease in engine RPM, an impact with terrain, and a left wing low attitude. Data downloaded from the airplane's primary flight display showed that just prior to the accident, the airplane's nose pitched up to about 22 degrees. As the airplane rolled to the left and then descended rapidly with a pitch of 30 degrees nose down. The airspeed at the time the data ended was 71 knots. The left roll continued until the data ended. End quote. The report notes that the pilot did not extend the flaps for the landing and that the airplane flight manual recommends full flaps for all landings unless the flaps are inoperative, and no abnormalities with the flap system were found during the post-crash investigation. The NTSB probable cause states, quote, the pilot's failure to maintain adequate airspeed during the go-around, which resulted in the airplane exceeding its critical angle of attack and a subsequent aerodynamic stall, end quote. Now, this is a tragedy that should not happen. As pilots, we have a responsibility to maintain proficiency in all areas, including go-arounds. Know the procedure, practice the procedure, review the procedure just prior to each approach, and if the approach is not stabilized, go around without hesitation. This cause of the inadvertent stall is painted with a broader brush. Failure to maintain airspeed can come from a variety of reasons. This is just one of several scenarios in which a pilot, in an attempt to climb, increases pitch, which of course increases the angle of attack until the critical angle of attack is reached and the airplane stalls. In this case, 2 people died and 2 were critically injured in the crash of a Cessna 172. The NTSB report includes the following, quote, witnesses and airport surveillance video revealed that the airplane took off to the north and immediately entered a nose-high attitude at slow airspeed while not climbing. The pilot then began a left 270-degree turn and crossed the departure end of the runway in an easterly heading. The airplane impacted terrain east of the runway and a post-impact fire ensued, end quote. Post-accident weight and balance calculations revealed that the airplane's weight at takeoff was about 224 pounds, or nearly 10%, more than the maximum allowable gross weight, and the airplane was not within the allowable operating envelope. The temperature was about 88 degrees Fahrenheit. The airplane was a 1957 model Cessna with a standard 145 horsepower engine. The NTSB probable cause states, quote, the pilot's failure to perform a pre-flight weight and balance calculation and his operation of a flight and an excessive takeoff weight resulting in an exceedance of the airplane's critical angle of attack after liftoff and an aerodynamic stall from which the pilot was unable to recover, end quote. We must not ask the airplane to disobey the laws of physics because it just can't do that. These reasons include raising the nose excessively to clear terrain or obstacles, excessive pitch angle after making an overweight or high-density altitude takeoff, and simple inattention, and of course more. Something that has become readily available for retrofit to most GA airplanes is the angle of attack indicator. There are a number of different kits available. I once owned a Piper Navajo which was equipped with an AOA indicator, and I found it to be extremely valuable as a safety enhancement. I'm a big supporter of this technology, and it's not very expensive, at least in airplane terms, to do an upgrade. This graphic from the FAA Airplane Flying Handbook shows the basic operation and the indications of an AOA. We should note that there are several manufacturers of AOA indicators and they do not all use the same display format. It's critical to understand the indications and the limitations of the unit installed in any airplane we fly. So in summary, we briefly reviewed the aerodynamics of the stall, provided some resources to learn more about the stall, and we looked at a few common scenarios that can lead to the inadvertent stall. Of course, there is much more to the subject, so I would encourage you to take a deeper dive into the FAA Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge and the FAA Airplane Flying Handbook and other appropriate sources. Again, Both these publications are available for free from the FAA's website. Just download them in a PDF format. For much more aviation safety information on a variety of subjects, please visit our website, vectorsforsafety.com. We want to thank Avemco Insurance for their sponsorship. And please always remember to fly like your life depends on it. I'm Gene Benson.